have a player that you're probably very familiar with on the left, Reid Duke. He's playing a junk mid-range deck, and he's playing against Tyler Wilkerson, who's playing black-white mid-range. Both players are sitting at 9 and 4, so their top 8 chances are still alive, but they're going to have to win out from here on out.
Tyler, a player who you may remember from the SCG Open in Orlando, where he nearly won both events, winning the Standard Open and then I believe top 4ing the Legacy Open the following day.
Yes, very difficult to win both events. So everyone's still, I think Jerry Thompson might still be the only player who ever actually accomplished that feat.
Correct. Now Reid is playing a junk mid-range deck. We're going to have a deck tech with him available. And this deck looks like an incredible metagame call if you're anticipating a lot of beatdown decks. A creature base of Sylvan Caryatid, Scavenging Ooze, Courser Krufix, Palicranos, Archangel of Thune main deck, and 2 copies of Obsidat.
Yeah, so both decks are a little slower. They don't really have any early drops. They start going around turn 3. Like you said, Reid's deck has Sylvan Courser Krufix. Tyler has Lifebane Zombie, which he cast to take out the Palicranos, and Reid had an answer in Abrupt Decay. Now, Reid's got a reasonable hand. He's got another copy of Abrupt Decay. Top deck's a Scavenging Ooze here. And he still has that Elspeth in his hand that he revealed.
And that's the big thing that he's building up towards in this match is Elspeth is quite good once in play against control decks, but he's going to be under the gun a little bit against this Desecration Demon.
Yeah, Desecration Demon. Reid currently does not have an answer. Abrupt Decay does not deal with Desecration Demon. He does have that Elspeth, which potentially can be an answer, but that is around 2 turns away from getting cast. So Reid Duke's going to be under a little pressure here. Looks like Tyler has a couple of Lifebane Zombies still in his hand, along with an Underworld Connections, which is going to be important if he can get it to resolve.
And it's really challenging to beat a deck like Mono Black Devotion or Black White mid-range by playing a slow game. They have so many powerful tools like Thoughtseize, sources of card advantage like Underworld Connections, and then some big finishers. So I suspect Reid's matchup game 1 is a little bit on the rough side, especially if he's playing against a build with main deck Lifebane Zombie, as many of Reid's creatures are green or white.
And if you're Tyler here, you have Lifebane Zombie, Underworld Connections as your options. Do you lead with Lifebane Zombie to try to bait the Abrupt Decay, or do you just go for the Connections?
I think that I like going for Connections here, in part because Tyler just simply needs to find land drops for the rest of his hand. He's bottlenecked on mana right now, so it's not even clear to me if Reid would Abrupt Decay the Lifebane Zombie if that got played.
Yeah, so Tyler doesn't try to bait the Abrupt Decay. He just goes for Connections, like you said, to try to draw into that land. Reid does use Abrupt Decay, and then he activates Scavenging Ooze to make it a little bigger and gain a little life. He's at 15 right now to Tyler's 19. He attacks with Scavenging Ooze, dropping Tyler down to 13. And now here comes Palicranos. So here's another heavy hitter for Reid to kind of help him race that Desecration Demon.
But the big problem here is that Reid is also not drawing lands, and we know that he's stranded with that Elspeth in his hand from that earlier Lifebane Zombie.
Yeah, just an Elspeth in his hand. Not sure, I'm not sure what the other card in his hand is, but currently, Tyler does have, it looks like, a Last Breath in his hand, which won't be able to target any of the creatures on Reid's side. He does have a Devour Flesh, though.
Yeah, the question is, Tyler would really like to find mana, and particularly white mana, but can he afford to spend his entire turn with Underworld Connections to draw a card when he's facing down a significant amount of pressure from Reid at this stage?
Yeah, so he does find the land. Now he has Underworld Connections active, but like you said, it's going to be tough for him to find the right land. I think he did find another land on top of his deck, but it might be another Temple of Silence, which means it will come into play tapped, so he won't be able to resolve the Elspeth that's in his hand.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, Tyler does need a 6th land and a second source of white, certainly. It's not clear if he has the time to play another comes into play tap land the following turn.
Yeah, because Reid could potentially attack for 9 damage next turn, dropping Tyler to 6 if he has a 5th land here and wants to monstrous that Palicranos.
It looks like Tyler decided to keep on top.
Oh, so Courser. And Courser does help Reid find that land there. So not only does he get a little life cushion, he finds the 5th land he needs, and this would try to help him get to Elspeth. And there's an answer for both Elspeth and Desecration Demon.
Well, unfortunately, right now, Hero's Downfall is not castable for Reid, so I don't think he's going to want to keep this one.
Oh, yes, so he doesn't have double black. So he ships it to the bottom through the Temple Scry, and he reveals a Golgari Guildgate.
Golgari Guildgate, of course, very frustrating to draw in light of the Elspeth in hand. That is 1 copy in his deck, naturally.
So Reid will get another draw. He'll draw the Guildgate, and then he'll get another flip off the Courser. So potentially he could still see that Elspeth come into play next turn. He's in pretty good shape. He's at 10 now. He's going to be facing 6 in the air from the Desecration Demon, but I don't think he's that concerned about that just yet. Courser's holding back the Mutavaults on Tyler's side of the board. Let's see if Tyler draws a 6 land here. He needs double white, and it is, yeah, he left the Temple of Silence on top of his deck. He has a Last Breath, so he could potentially just take out the Courser if he wants to and then attack with Mutavaults. But it looks like he's probably going to try to draw cards with the Underworld Connections this turn.
Yeah, it's, Tyler's really trying, he had to take a deep breath and suck up a bad turn getting that Underworld Connections deployed. We'll see if he's able to squeeze enough value out of it.
Yeah, not sure he can even realistically attack with Desecration Demon this turn. He's obviously going to announce the attack phase, give Reid the option to sacrifice a creature, but not sure if attacking here is a reasonable play for him.
Now, it is noteworthy that he has Last Breath in hand. So a line that he can set up is Last Breathing the Courser, sitting it back with Desecration Demon, allowing Reid to sacrifice something to try to attack for lethal, potentially. Tyler then using Devour Flesh on himself, sacrificing the demon and gaining a bunch of life, and then maybe getting the breathing space necessary to deploy Elspeth the following turn.
Yeah, he really just wants to try to get the Elspeth into play. Elspeth can obviously take over the game for him if he can get it to resolve. Reid had to ship one of his Hero's Downfalls to the bottom of his library because he wasn't able to cast it. So Tyler's probably just in a position where he wants to make sure he can get that Elspeth to resolve next turn. He does have, like you said, he does have access to Devour Flesh in his hand, along with he's got Lifebane Zombie, but it doesn't look like either one of those Lifebanes are going to enter play this turn.
Yeah, he has the ability to also block with his Mutavault as well. So Tyler really has the ability here to put the onus on Reid to make a decision, and then react accordingly.
Yep. And and you're right. Obviously, if Reid actually sacrifices Scavenging Ooze mid-combat, oh wow! So it looks like Tyler's going to cast Lifebane Zombie here, targeting Reid, and Reid has to lose a Archangel. So that could have been a pretty devastating card to contend with. But
I believe doesn't this leave Tyler dead, as Reid can use Palakranos to fight the Lifebane Zombie, tap down the Desecration Demon, and hit for exactly lethal?
And that's what I was going to say. He needed to keep that Devour Flesh up, because now he can actually Monstrous for 2, fighting the Lifebane Zombie, and then just sacrifice the Ooze to the Demon to tap the Demon.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Tyler understood the full implications of this line of play, but I think Reid's going to have him for exactly lethal here.
Yeah, so the trigger has to go in the stack before he attacks.
Yeah, Tyler has to announce it.
And that's game, yeah. So had Tyler actually just kept up his mana, he could have actually, even if Reid took that line, that would have been awesome for Tyler, because if he could actually Devour Fleshed Reid.
Yeah, there's other.
So
yeah,
it would have been awesome for him, and I fully expected him to just leave mana up, because not only can you actually activate your Underworld Connections, but you can block with your Mutavault, plus you can block Mutavault and cast Devour Flesh if you want. You just have so many more plays.
There's a ton of flexibility he has afforded to. If Reid plays a creature before combat and sacrifices it, you can Chumple your Mutavault, or you can Devour Flesh Reid, or yourself as appropriate. If Reid just sacrifices his Ooze before combat, you can just Devour Flesh Reid and leave him with nothing. But tapping out, it couldn't just be tapping out for anything. It had to be something that Reid could then fight with Palakranos to make it lethal. So I'm not sure if Tyler quite understood the full implications of his line of play, but Reid able to steal game 1.
Wow, so Reid looked bad for a while there because of Desecration Demon, but yep, now we're going to move on to game 2 here, and Tyler Wilkerson's going to be on the play. And looking at his sideboard, he's a typical black-white deck. He's got more Doomblades that he has access to. I expect those to come in just because he saw Palakranos and Archangel Thrune. He's got 3 copies of Duress, 1 Blind Obedience, 3 Sin Collectors, 1 Pithing Needle, 2 Revoke Existence, and 2 Erebos, God of the Dead. Now, the real question is here, Duress, probably not a card you really want against Junk. They have a lot of creatures. Sometimes after board, they'll have more spells. Obviously, he doesn't know about Underworld Connections. He hasn't seen that out of Reid Duke's deck yet. So I don't expect the rest to come in. I definitely expect the Doomblades to come in. I definitely expect Erebos, so God of Dead, to come in as well. Just because, even though that's typically a card you want against control, it does shut off a lot of Reid's life gain. He saw Scavenging Ooze, he saw Archangel, so Erebos could actually be pretty good against Reid's deck.
On Reid's side now, I suspect his matchup against control decks in general is not very good, as his creature base is definitely geared towards being aggressive decks. His sideboard is a full conversion into an entirely different deck, essentially. Very anti-control sideboard. 3 copies of Duress, 3 copies of Sin Collector, and 3 copies of Underworld Connections to supplement the 1 copy as main deck. A Pithing Needle, 3 Mistcutter Hydras, a Doomblade, a Dark Betrayal, and a Golgari Charm. I expect essentially a full conversion here. He can bring in the Golgari Charm to fizzle a removal spell, or to blow up an Underworld Connections on the other side. He can bring in the Pithing Needle to fight over Erebos or an opposing Underworld Connections. He can, and then of course bring in his 3 Duresses, 3 Sin Collectors, and 3 Underworld Connections of his own, and basically become sort of a Black Devotion style deck of his own. What I'm really interested to see is, does Reid dramatically change his creature base in the face of these Lifebane zombies? He saw that Tyler had multiple copies in his main deck. Presumably Tyler's going to leave them in, as he saw, Archangel Thune, Palakranos, Corsair Krufix, and so forth. So does Reid actually take out some of his expensive green and white creatures like Obsidian and Archangel, anticipating that they're just going to get eaten up by Lifebane zombie, or does he leave it in, maybe get rid of some of his removal spells and try to just out-card advantage Tyler?
Yeah, despite the fact that it won the first game, I'm not sure how powerful Palakranos is in this matchup, particularly because, one, there's going to be so many Doomblade type effects that he has to contend with after board, plus you can just get it stripped by Lifebane Zombie. Scavenging Ooze, Courser, I'm not sure you can afford to take out those cards necessarily. However, Archangel Thune, Palakranos, I think those are kind of cards you can probably afford to take out in this matchup, be a little more controlling. Obsidat, though, I think Obsidat's just such a good top deck that I think it's worth keeping in. I think the key thing for Reid, though, in this matchup is Tyler might not be aware that Reid has access to Underworld Connections. So he might not bring in his Revoke Existence. And even if he does, he only really has 2 copies, whereas Reid has 4 Abrupt Decays. So Reid just has more ways to get his Underworld Connections going and stop Tyler from getting his going.
Yeah, Reid can't make a full conversion to play around Lifebane Zombie because literally every creature in his deck is green or white. Sylvan Carriage, his Scavenging Ooze, Corsair Krufix, Palakranos, Archangel Thune, and Obsidat. So I think what he's going to want to do is probably remove the low impact white and green creatures. Maybe that means something like Corsair Krufix or Palakranos hits the bench. But I do agree with you that Obsidat is such a high impact draw, especially when Reid's supplementing all this with a bunch of Duresses and Sin Collectors and Thoughtseizes. He might be able to open up a path to land something like Obsidat. So I think he's going to want to remove some of his lower impact creatures, but still keep in the higher impact ones.
Yeah, and again, he might be okay with just winning with, Underworld Connections plus any Planeswalker I eventually draw. He's got, after board, he'll have 4 copies of Underworld Connections, plus he has 1 Read the Bones main too, so he has a little more card drawing than Tyler. So it doesn't really matter what he wins with. Eventually, he's just going to start stripping away cards with Thoughtseize and Sin Collector and win with something.
Yeah. He has 2 copies of Elspeth and 1 copy of Vraska the Unseen, to your point about trying to win the game that way.
Yeah. So both players examining their opening hands, see if they want to mulligan or not. Tyler, again, is on the play, so he has to decide first. Looks like he's got some lands and spells. They might not be the right mix, but yes, he is going to keep. Both players are keeping. So Tyler leads with a white-bordered Swamp, which I'm sure you're quite fond of.
I am not. Although leading up with a Swamp and saying go means that there's probably something not quite right with Tyler's hand, as he doesn't have access to white mana.
Yeah, and his hand, the other thing is, like, you would expect him to have a card like Underworld Connections or, well, he has Lifebane Zombie, but yeah, this isn't ideal because so he's able to take a Courser, but Reid has a pretty good hand against this type of hand. He's got a second Courser, he's got that Underworld Connections, but unfortunately he can't cast it just yet. But he's got an Elspeth as well, and a Dark Betrayal, which can potentially deal with Desecration Demon.
Yeah, both of these players very clearly missing colored mana here. If Reid is able to find some sources of black mana, his hand becomes excellent.
Yeah, Tyler obviously not nearly as vulnerable to color screw as Reid's deck is, but looks like I guess Tyler's hand was a little slow. Maybe he was afraid of not having either a Thoughtseize or Duress effect on turn 1 or 2. But his hand has a lot of removal, 2 Doomblade effects.
And that's an excellent draw for Reid there, as he found an Overgrown Tomb off the top. Now he has 1 black mana. That cleans up a lot of what's happening. And if he's able to find a second black mana, then we can start playing things like Underworld Connections.
Yeah, so here's the question. Does Tyler just Doomblade that Courser right away, knowing Reid's hand? Reid's a little mana light. He has it looks like he has the option to, yeah, he can't actually cast any of the creature. He has a Desecration Demon, so his only line here is really to Doomblade the Courser and play the Temple and Scry.
Yeah, there's a pretty huge risk here in allowing Reid to untap here. The game's kind of taking a slow pace. Reid's hand's very expensive, so if he finds a land on top of the deck, it's potentially really bad for Tyler. I like erring on the side of just getting that thing out of the way and not getting too fancy.
So it was actually, he did have the decision because it looks like Tyler does have a second Lifebane Zombie, so you could have decided to try to cast Lifebane that turn, but again, the main card he wants to take is Obsidat, which is on top of Reid's deck, and he won't be able to cast it next turn anyway, so leading with Doomblade there allows him to follow up with a Lifebane next turn, taking that Obsidat.
Yeah, just better sequencing from Tyler that way.
Yeah. So Reid has an Abrupt Decay and a Dark Betrayal, so he does have answers to one of the Lifebane Zombies. He'll probably want to save the Dark Betrayal for possibly a Desecration Demon, but we'll see how the next few turns play out, because I expect Tyler to lead with Lifebane Zombie here.
Well, I think he may want to lead with an attack first and just see how Reid reacts.
Yeah.
I do agree with you that, the risk of upsets here is fairly high.
Wow, so Reid actually does lead with Dark Betrayal, possibly wanting to save that Abrupt Decay for an Underworld Connections.
Yeah.
So here Tyler has to wonder, do I want to try to just get a Desecration Demon out there, or do I want to take the opposite out? And he does want to take the opposite out. So Reid does have that Underworld Connections in his hand. Unfortunately, he just has 1 black mana still. Let's see if he can get a second black. And it is a Temple, so it allowed him to scry a little bit to try to find another black source. And unfortunately, it looks like he might have to scry the card to the bottom of his library. So still no double black for Reid just yet.
But he's still keeping his head above water for the time being and developing the game where he may be able to cast Elspeth.
Yes. So even though he doesn't have double black, he still has that Elspeth, and Tyler does not currently have a Hero's Downfall. He just has Orzhov, Guildgate. Yes, Abrupt Decay is going to take out Lifebane Zombie. He's got Orzhov, Guildgate, Doomblade, and Desecration Demon, and along with a Devour Flesh. So if Elspeth can resolve, it'd be pretty good for him right here.
Yeah. Start making tokens, of course, a great answer to Desecration Demon, as is the minus power somewhere down the line.
Yeah, so let's see if Reid is able to get a 6 mana here. He's at 15, so he's still got a reasonable life total. However, Tyler does have a Mutavault in play as well. So Mutavault and Desecration Demon are going to put Reid on a 2-turn clock here. Yeah, so Tyler has just removal in his hand currently, along with 1 other land. And yes, Mutavault gets activated, and 8 damage comes over, dropping Reid to 7.
And Reid's decision to play around Underworld Connections instead of Desecration Demon haunting him a little bit here. Stranded with Abrupt Decay in hand.
So does Reid have an answer to this attack yet? Even a creature just to block the Mutavault won't do anything, because Tyler does have a Doomblade, along with a Devour Flesh in his hand.
Well, the big thing here is if Reid can actually play Elspeth, make a bunch of tokens, and Tyler doesn't draw a removal spell next turn, Reid may be able to stabilize against the Desecration Demon.
Yeah, I don't think he has a 6 lands, so I'm not sure. Yeah, let's see what Reid can pull off here. He's got that Abrupt Decay, but that can't really target anything because it's a non-land, so it can't deal with the Mutavault.
Well, it looks like he might have drawn an Overgrown Tomb this turn, and he
wow.
has.
So he drops down to 5. He can't. Elspeth also gives you an option to -3 it to destroy all creatures with 4 power, but that would actually expose Elspeth to Mutavault attack.
So if Reid here is playing with Hero's Downfall, he's showing a really good sense of the moment. He suspects that Tyler's hand is likely full of removal spells, which it is, and there's a huge risk in playing Elspeth, because if Tyler's able to chain together 3 removal spells, the demon is no longer effective. So he's willing to, suck up the fact Tyler might draw a Duress or a Thoughtseize and take Elspeth this turn, but if he is able to Hero's Downfall or Dark Betrayal this Desecration Demon, he enters the following turn with a much better board to start deploying Elspeth.
Yeah, so if he can just deal with the Desecration Demon this turn.
And I would imagine by playing the land untapped here and saying go, we're looking at something like Hero's Downfall.
So Mutavault gets activated, and both creatures come over, and Hero's Downfall targets Desecration Demon, and now Reid is going to take 2 from the Mutavault, dropping himself to 3. So you're right. Basically, he was playing around a triple removal spell there, because even if he plays Elspeth, makes 3 tokens, if Tyler has 3 removal spells, then that's game. Now, Reid hasn't cast Duress or Thoughtseize this game, so he doesn't know exactly what's in Tyler's hand. But to your point, it's probably reasonable for him to assume it's a lot of removal.
Right. There's 2 scenarios, right? Because he's not casting creatures. Scenario 1 is it's nothing but lands, in which case you have the time to spend your turn that way. And if it's removal spells, then you're much better served taking the line that Reid just did.
Yep. So Reid plays cautiously, and it pays off for him as Tyler draws land. He still has that Doomblade and Devour Flesh along with a Swamp. So here comes Elspeth threatening to just completely take over the game here.
And Elspeth is so good, obviously, provides a lot of blockers, also gives insurance against some of the bigger draws that Tyler has, like Desecration Demon, like Blood Baron, as the minus power is also efficient at taking care of it.
Yep. Reid still has that Underworld Connections in his hand, but at 3 life, he doesn't have that much flexibility to use it. Tyler draws a Thoughtseize a turn too late,
One turn too late.
So Tyler doesn't have many options here. He can activate Mutavault, attack Reid, see what Reid does. If Reid tries to triple block, he does have removal, but again, it's basically an uphill battle at this point.
Yeah. Elspeth has a habit of being better than you if you were able to stack your deck.
Yeah.
So this is going to be challenging.
So he takes the Courser. Lifebane Zombie still a very good draw here for Tyler because Elspeth actually can't deal with the Lifebane Zombie. It can't kill it with the minus ability, and none of the tokens can block Lifebane's Intimidate.
Yeah, Obsidat's also a pretty reasonable way for Tyler to win the game from this position as well.
So Tyler has some draws here. Reid has that Underworld Connections. He could cast it and maybe just try to draw into some life gain, like another Courser or Archangel potentially if he kept it in, or the Obsidat left in his deck. He also has Scavenging Ooze as well, so that'd be a good draw for him.
Yeah, the risk of going from 3 to 2 means that Reid would die to Obsidat or a Gray Merchant. Now, Gray Merchant not commonly in black-white lists, but
yeah,
certainly not 0% of the time.
Yeah, so Reid just cast it. That doesn't mean he has to activate it. He's just going to get it out there. Again, if he ever draws a life gain spell, it's going to be great for him. So, but Tyler does draw that Erebos that we talked about. So at least Reid won't be able to gain any life for the remainder of the game unless he's able to deal with that Erebos somehow.
Yeah, but Reid's going to be in a position soon to really start attacking Tyler. I mean, we're going to be looking at a lethal attack in not that long. So it's not exactly clear how much he can use this Erebos.
Yeah, so basically it looks like Tyler, because Reid is going to be able to uptick Elspeth next turn, basically Reid has Tyler on a 2-turn clock.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what Tyler's outs are at this point. Lifebane Zombie no longer appears to be an out because if he draws it next turn, it still won't get to attack in time.
Well, if Reid falls to 2 here, then Obsidat is an out.
Yeah, so that I'm surprised that Reid actually activated, considering you're right. That is an out for him. Now he's not going to be able to gain life anymore. So now Obsidat is an additional out for Tyler. So now if you're Tyler, I definitely just activate Erebos.
Oh yeah. You have to try to find as many cards as possible.
Yeah, now that you know Obsidat is an out for you, I just start drawing. He basically has two activations this turn, and then in his turn, as long as he keeps 5 mana up, he has 1 activation and possibly a second if he draws a land.
Right. He's got a lot of looks at it.
Yeah, and he does have 3 Obsidats in his deck. He has not drawn one yet today, so there are 3 cards left in his deck that can potentially win him the game.
Yeah, and the die is cast for Tyler. He doesn't really have an option other than to try to draw a bunch of cards because this Elspeth's going to overwhelm him next turn.
Yeah. The other card that could potentially win him the game is Blind Obedience. However, it's unlikely he actually boarded it in.
That would be a really humiliating way to lose this game.
So Reid goes down to 1, figuring, well, I'm already in Obsidat range anyway. There's no difference here. I'm not sure what he's trying to dig for, though. Maybe he's just afraid that Elspeth alone isn't good enough. I'm not sure what he's actually looking for in this situation.
I mean, if he did bring in his 1 copy of Pithing Needle, this would be a really good spot for it.
Even still, though, I still like keeping myself out of Obsidat range.
Oh, sure. Well, once you've gone from 3 to 2, there's no point in worrying about going to 2 to 1.
I agree that once you're at 2, going to 1 makes no difference, but the 3 to 2 is the issue.
Yeah.
So Reid attacks with 5 tokens. Tyler, if he takes it, will drop to 13. That will still allow him to get 4 activations potentially. So Reid just upticks Elspeth again, and now he's going to threatening lethal next turn. So Tyler spends 2 to draw a card. Looks like it just was another Devour Flesh. Draws another card, goes to 11, or 9 rather. Does not look like he has the Obsidat yet. He still has a couple more activations.
Yeah, it looks like he found an untapped land here, so he's going to get 2 more looks at it.
Yeah, so if you're Tyler, I'm pretty sure you have to just be all in on Obsidat here. You have to just draw cards.
Yeah.
So he's setting aside his mana, just setting aside Obsidat mana right now.
Yeah, I mean, there is still some argument where if he's able to find a Hero's Downfall, he could Hero's Downfall the Elspeth and have a Mutavault back to block and not take lethal this turn.
Yeah, there are currently 9. Oh, wow. So
never mind.
The Obsidat was the top card, and Obsidat comes down, and Reid Duke falls in game 2. And again, it all came down to Reid deciding to move from 3 life to 2 life to draw a card. And it's strange because none of the cards he drew ended up mattering. It was all in on Elspeth anyway.
Yeah, it's possible that he would have been short on resources to win the game if Tyler found Hero's Downfall, if he wasn't actually looking for extra cards. At that point, he might be playing into a lot of different outs that Tyler has access to. But certainly the way that game played out, it was not great of Reid to use the Underworld connections, especially since he didn't find anything of relevance.
Well, the main point of issue I have is if you're worried about Hero's Downfall on Elspeth, then you can activate your Underworld connections once we get to that stage of the game.
Sure.
You know what I mean? There's no reason to expose yourself to Abzadat because you could easily just win next turn if you bricks on Hero's Downfall. If he draws Hero's Downfall, then you've obviously shifted to a different stage of the game. That's when you have to start being aggressive with your connections. But either way, I mean, Reid Duke falls. The second game, Tyler Wilkerson managed to top deck Abzadat in the right moment. And when I say top deck, I'm being fairly loose because he did draw 5 cards over the course of
that.
Yeah,
when you Wheel of Fortune, it's really hard to call it a top deck because it's one of the, 7 cards.
Yeah, so Tyler Wilkerson managed to even up this match, and we are going to game 3. And Reid Duke, his hand looked pretty good, but he was a little color screwed early on, which is part of the problem when you're playing these 3-color decks. I mean, even though you have a lot of scry lands, every once in a while I'll see these decks because they have double white, double black, and double green. Yeah. So it's really tough to kind of put your mana together sometimes.
Yeah, I bet that all these players are really eagerly anticipating the green-black Scryland coming out in the next set.
Yeah, we need that Golgari Scryland.
It's such a
that and the Is It one.
It's such a huge part of what makes Esper the deck that it is. Imagine if one of the 3 Scrylands didn't exist. The power level of that deck probably goes down appreciably if it doesn't have the mana fixing and the additional scrying.
It's kind of crazy because you had Esper at Pro Tour Dublin when they just had Temple of Silence and Temple of Deceit. But it didn't feel like the win percentage of that deck was nearly as high as it is nowadays.
It's a big deal. I mean, it's something that gets lost in the shuffle. It's really easy to point to things like, there's a lot of green-red decks, and so we're adding Doomblade. I'm getting a lot of percentages that way. Or we figured out the right mixture of counter spells or how many Thoughtseize we're supposed to play in the main deck. All those sort of adaptations and inclusions do make a difference, but the Scrylands are something that gets lost in the shuffle for a lot of these decks. And I think a deck like blue-white-red control, once there's a red-blue Scryland, becomes much more of a legitimate option. And these various Junk and Golgari decks also do as well.
Yes. As we saw redraw a Golgari Guildgate that game. Oh, if it was a Scryland.
Crestfallen. Golgari Guildgate looms for the next turn.
So in game 3 here, Reid is going to have the option to be on the play. And I don't really see anything changing for him. You don't really see him go to his sideboard. I think he's still comfortable with his game plan. I will say, though, you are right. The fact that he used the Dark Betrayal instead of the Abrupt Decay to kind of make sure he doesn't lose the Underworld connections did end up costing him.
Yeah, I mean, the game looked like it was going to be, as these games usually are, about card advantage and outlasting the other person. But Reid Duke's life total was weirdly relevant that game and ended up killing him when he had a fairly substantial edge otherwise.
Yeah, you're basically picking your poison. Do I want to lose the Underworld connections or do I want to lose the Desecration Demon? Obviously, Reid didn't know which one Tyler had in his hand, but the way it turned out, he just chose wrong, and Desecration Demon actually did a lot of damage to Reid's life total.
Well, it's not even clear. Here's the thing, and this is why I like Reid playing around connections versus Desecration Demon. It's not even clear if Desecration Demon's in your opponent's deck after sideboard.
Yep.
You've shown Hero's Downfall. You probably have some Dark Betrayals in your sideboard. You have Elspeth. The likelihood that Desecration Demon is very good in a game is fairly low, whereas Underworld Connections is always going to be awesome. It's at least going to replace itself and force a response out of Reid, whether it's a Pithy Needle or a Golgari Charm or an Abrupt Decay or what have you. So in general, I think it's correct for Reid to be playing around connections rather than demon because there's 4 connections in your opponent's deck. It's less clear if there's 4 demons.
Well, the only issue I have with that is that in the Mono Black Mirror back in the day when Mono Black Devotion was everywhere, Desecration Demon was by far the worst card in the mirror because, there's just Dark Betrayals. Everybody has Dark Betrayals. It's probably the weakest card. So I agree from that perspective. However, in looking at Reid's deck, he doesn't have a lot of ways to kill Desecration Demon. I mean, in game 1, it was really good against him. In this game, he has to think it's probably going to be pretty good against him as well. Because he has 4 copies of Abrupt Decay and for Hero's Downfall as his removal package, that Hero's Downfall is really his only way to deal, along with 1 copy of Dark Betrayal after board.
Yeah, he's got, Elspeth provides sort of a reasonable answer to it, and, Palicronus may be able to get it done in some spots, but he is drawing pretty slim.
Yeah, and even if you do have Abrupt Decay for connections, you're still 2-for-1ing yourself. Tyler's still going to get a card draw out of it. Obviously, it's important to get connections off the board, But I don't know. I feel like you have to be concerned about Desecration Demon if you Reid's deck because he just doesn't have many answers to it.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is Reid's deck has the appearance of a deck that has a lot of answers to Desecration Demon. You know, you'd anticipate a lot of different removal spells. You know, is it realistic that Reid's deck has some copies of Devour Flesh in it? Totally.
Yeah.
It's not like Tyler's armed with this information, but on the surface of it, Reid's deck appears to be a deck that's pretty robust against Desecration Demon. Oddly enough, it actually isn't. He doesn't have that many answers.
So Reid is comfortable with his opening hand. Unfortunately for Tyler, he's now mulliganing down to 5 cards here. So he's going to be have quite the uphill battle for him here.
Especially since these matchups are all about card advantage and making your land drops to your big stuff. Mulligans are really hard to overcome.
Yeah, obviously he has Underworld Connections to try to draw him back into it. However, with Reid having 4 Abrupt Decays and possibly even Golgari Charm after board as answers to Underworld Connections, it's going to be tough for Tyler to kind of regain the advantage.
3 copies of Duress as well.
Yeah.
You know, Reid's definitely well stocked to play the card advantage game in post-board matches.
Yeah, you can't be happy when you're mulliganing to 5 on the draw against a deck that has both Thoughtseize, Duress, and Sin Collector.
Yep.
So let's see if Tyler can pull the upset here. Both players at 9 and 4. They pretty much need to win the next 2 rounds along with this one to still keep their top 8 hopes alive.
Yep, Reid's tiebreaker should be on the better side as he did have 2 buys going to the event as one of our top 16 ranked players coming into the end of Season 1.
So Tyler Wilkerson is going to look at his 5-card hand. We see a Thoughtseize and lands, so that is good enough.
It'll have to do.
Temple of Silence is the lead for Reid. He's going to scry the card to the bottom, or he's debating it, rather. It looks like he's got another Temple in his hand as well, so he's going to be able to make his land drops this game, and he does keep the card on top of his library. Let's see if Tyler leads with a Thoughtseize. He does.
I mean, lands and a bunch of Thoughtseizes is about as good of a hand as you can ask for here. It means that Tyler can make his land drops. It also means that discard spells that Reid draws, of which he has many, aren't going to be very effective in this game.
Yeah, so a pretty good hand for Reid, even though it looks like there's only 2 spells in there. He does have 2 Scry lands, which is actually pretty good against a deck with Thoughtseizes and Duress. You know, you just want to make sure you can keep making your land drops, and then if you do have a threat, you can just keep it on top of your deck.
Yeah.
So looks like Obsidian, or Tyler does have a second Thoughtseize in his hand, but he's going to go for the Obsidian here, leaving with Reid with just a bunch of lands and a Corsair Prufix.
Yeah, he has to take the Obsidian here as he has to respect the ability of Reid to draw a discard spell of his own, get the Thoughtseize, and then Tyler has to try to manage the game around Obsidian and sufficient lands to cast it.
So it looks like Tyler just has a bunch of lands in his hand along with a second copy of Thoughtseize, and that is probably going to see another Obsidian that Reid drew for the turn.
Yep.
So although he probably wanted to take the Corsair, looks like he's going to have to take the Obsidian yet again. With Reid having plenty of mana, he's eventually going to cast it, so that will take over the game if it resolves. So Reid is going to lose that second copy of Obsidian, and Tyler is now out of gas. He has a Temple, and looks like he's going to probably scry that card to the bottom of his library.
Those are the only 2 copies of Obsidian in Reid's list, so that threat is now gone for the remainder of the game from Tyler's side.
So Reid drew an Underworld Connections for the turn, so now he has the option of just casting that Underworld Connections, getting into play to make sure he doesn't lose it to a Duress or a Thoughtseize, or casting Corsair.
I like casting Corsair here as he has to respect the Tyler's ability to have Lifebane Zombie this turn.
Yeah. So yeah, you either am I playing around Thoughtseize or am I playing around Lifebane Zombie? So Tyler has neither, and now Corsair's going to come online. It reveals an Abrupt Decay, so Reid can play one of the lands from his hand. He could also play a second copy of Corsair, or he can choose to just play the Underworld Connections. Now, what do you do in this situation? Do you kind of press your advantage by playing a second Corsair, or do you start drawing cards with Underworld Connections?
I think that Reid needs to start drawing some more cards. I don't think the pressure here is really that sufficient, and Tyler finding one of his big threats here could be disastrous for Reid if he's not equipped to handle it, but Reid's going to go a different path. I don't think going beatdowns here is terrible either, but I would err on the side of just trying to draw some cards.
Yeah, so Reid's going to gain 2 life there. He's going to go back up to 20. He's got the Abrupt Decay on top of his library.
It's possible the tiebreaker from Reid's side is, again, the presence of Lifebane Zombie, erring on the side of getting green creatures out of his hand when he has the opportunity to do so.
And Reid is going to start, he's basically not going to draw another land for the rest of the game if he can just keep these Corsairs going. Reveals a Thoughtseize on top of his library. Reid can now cast Underworld Connections, and now it's awesome because he can play Underworld Connections, draw a card, and then reveal if there's another land on top of his library.
Yeah.
So Corsair Underworld Connections work pretty well together.
It's a combo.
And there it is. So he can take 2 from paying that overgrown tomb untapped, but he'll gain it right back from the coursers, and he could actually cast Thoughtseize. But again, knowing that Tyler hasn't played anything, there's a good chance that there's really nothing in his hand.
Well, it could be some good 5-mana creatures. Reasonable that it's Blood Baron or Obsidian is in Tyler's hand here. It is instead nothing. But.
Yeah, and Reid's probably fine with that because, like you said, he either gets a 5-drop or it's all lands, and either way, he's in good shape.
Yeah.
Tyler draws an Erebos here.
Tyler wasn't still in a position as badly as this game has gone, where if he found a Blood Baron or an Obsidian that turn, he could have potentially turned the game around.
Yeah. So Reid draws a Golgari Charm. He has a Scavenging Ooze on top of his deck, which he can draw to see if there's a land. And there's a Sylvan Caryatid, so he's not able to play a land off the top of his deck, but I think he might have one in his hand. He's no longer going to be able to gain life because Erebos is in play. He's going to scry away the Sylvan Caryatid and reveal a Dark Betrayal. So pretty good reveal there. Now he has answers to Desecration Demon.
Yeah, really good insurance policy for Reid to have that.
And now Scavenging Ooze comes into play. Because there are 2 Obsidots in Reid's graveyard, they can actually, Scavenging Ooze can become a 4/4. So Tyler is going to be dead next turn if he can't find a removal spell.
Yeah, and he really needed to draw again one of his impactful 5-drops that turn. Of course, Dark Betrayal shuts the door on Obsidian, and now he doesn't really have the life to play around with Erebos.
Yep, so unfortunately, it looks like Tyler Wilkerson, after a mulligan to 5, wasn't able to overcome a really good start from Reid. Looks like he's just adding things up here. He might want to try to draw a card with Erebos, seeing what his outs are, but I don't believe he has any outs here. Reid is content with just untapping now and attacking for 6. Temple of Silence off the top.
Underworld Connections plus Courser is a nice little synergy.
It's really nice.
Yeah. You don't get to see this in a lot of decks, of course. There's not a lot of, Jund or Junk style decks incorporating this, but it is really awesome getting to watch him manipulate that synergy.
So there's a Hero's Downfall. He can draw that for the turn if he chooses, but he's just going to attack. And Tyler is just going to draw a card in response to try to find a way to kill the Scavenging Ooze. It goes down to 4, and now he can no longer activate it again because even if he just draws a removal spell, he dies to either one of the coursers. So Tyler Wilkerson, after a mulligan to 5, falls to Reid Duke and moves down to 9 and 5.
Yeah, that's going to end any hope of a top 8 run for Tyler Wilkerson. Again, the star of the SCG Orlando show earlier this year.